Hey everybody, I'm Jeanette, a self-professed true crime nerd, and welcome to the Law and Murder Podcast, where we're going to be talking about true crime and exonerations. You ready? Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 4 of the Law and Murder Podcast. For those of you that have subscribed, thank you. I totally appreciate the support, and all the messages on Instagram, the text messages from friends and family have been super awesome and motivate me to continue to do this some more. Today's episode is going to be about the family annihilators. I have a series going on. The next 3 or 4 episodes are going to be about it. I'm kind of doing a personal mini study on family annihilators, the characteristics, pretty much the MO, and what really causes males particularly to just take out their whole entire family. Women do this as well, and maybe later on I'll go ahead and do the woman one, but for this series I want to concentrate on men. The 2 people that I'm going to talk about today have a big correlation with the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008. It actually did create an uprise in family annihilators in the United States. In 2007, it began with the mortgage crisis, and many people who had no credit or assets were buying homes. Mortgage prices were also going up. Since I don't really know about this whole financial thing, I'm just going to put it in Jeanette terms so that you can kind of get what I'm saying. People sold the accounts to other people who ended up filing for bankruptcy and creating a domino effect that created the financial crisis of 2007 to about 2009-ish. So again, the first few stories in this series is going to concentrate on that financial crisis. Financial crisis is typically one of the reasons why family annihilation actually happens. So here are the basic facts that I found about family annihilators, and you can tell me with these stories that I'm going to give you if the profile fits. The average age is 40 years old. Most of the time, it's the man of the house that's the perpetrator. The man is typically very successful and is the breadwinner in the family. They are very liked in the public, and you would, quote unquote, never think that this family would have had financial troubles or that the father or husband was distressed. Finances are the biggest reasons for family annihilation, and the other bigger reason anyway, is jealousy. The male will most likely kill themselves with their family due to the closeness they feel with their family. They are typically in some kind of trouble and decide that the family would be better off not living in the world. The male would typically be diagnosed with depression or have the symptoms of depression, and a note is left most of the time, but not all. Substance abuse can also be attributed, but it's not as high as the mental illness. The first family that I'm going to talk about is the Parente family. The Parente family to the public were considered to be a happy family. They lived comfortably, went to church, and William, the father, was a very successful tax lawyer in Long Island, New York. The family included Betty, William's wife, and their 2 girls, Catherine and Stephanie. After some time of being a tax lawyer, William decided to spread his wings and got involved with investing, and he had also become very successful doing that and gained a couple of clients. He was making such great money that he had started drawing out the assets from his investments, and of course, like it happens in the movies, one of his customers wanted out on the investment that he made because they were making good money, and William couldn't pay it out. This theme continued with many of his clients to the point that he had sent 6 checks to several people that would eventually bounce. One particular man was not really too happy with William's investment deals, and this prompted his investment customer to make a complaint with the Attorney General of New York. William found out that he was being investigated by the FBI for defrauding people out of $20 million. This amount of money, I don't care who you are, is going to stress anyone out. But because the financial crisis had begun and he had to begin to figure out a way to get out of this whole mess that he put himself into, it seems super impossible for him. And he had to come up with a game plan to get out of this and pay people back to avoid jail time. Meanwhile, in his real life outside of work, his daughter Stephanie, the oldest, was a sophomore in college, and she was very involved in school and was hoping to graduate with a degree in speech pathology. She was involved in all the extracurricular activities and wanted to study abroad. In April of 2009, she'd gone to visit her family in New York for spring break, and while she was in New York, she had a great week with her family and friends and made it back to school to start preparing for midterm exams. Her father had called her on the weekend of April 17th and said that he was going to go down to Baltimore where she was going to school. She found it kind of odd that they were just going to come and visit her after just seeing them, and they also had made plans to see each other that Friday of the next week because there was an orientation for her study abroad trip in Europe. Even though she found it odd, she had agreed to meet her family for meals because she had to study for exams. So her dad had scheduled the trip, booked the hotel on April 16th, and on April 16th, the Parente family went down to Baltimore to see their daughter for the weekend. The pressure was mounting on William due to the investigation and the collapsing of the economy, so he thought that getting out of town was something that would get his mind off of things, and of course, Mom and sister were more than happy to hang out with Stephanie. They made plans to hang out during the weekend, so April 19th comes, and Stephanie had made plans to be with her family for breakfast. So they all go out to eat breakfast, they had a good time, and then they go ahead and separate, Stephanie going back to her dorm room telling her family that she has to study for her midterm exams. She's already behind on them. She really needs to get going. So she goes back to her dorm room. Her family kind of hangs out, and they go back to the hotel room at some point in time. William had found in his mind that the only way that he was going to get out of giving this money back and paying for his crime, because, of course, in his mind, he couldn't find a way to pay all that money back and let his family in on his failures. His plan was to kill everyone in his family, but before he did that, he was going to have one last good weekend with them. So his family goes up to the 10th floor in the hotel room, doing whatever they do after you get out of dinner. And William, when his family wasn't looking, hit both his wife and daughter in the head, resulting in a blunt force trauma. Once they were down and unconscious, he suffocated both of them until they had passed away. After they had both passed, he placed them on the bed, side by side, next to each other. He then leaves the room, goes to the store, and buys himself a knife. I'm not really sure on the timeline about this, but I can only assume that it's probably around midday. Later on in the evening, he calls his daughter and has Stephanie come to see him at the hotel. And we can assume one of two things. He called her and told her that there was an emergency and she had to come to the hotel, or he invited her out to dinner or something for her to, kind of leave the hotel and go and meet her family. Either way, she's sitting at her desk in her dorm room. She gets up, leaves her chemistry book wide open, and goes to the hotel room. Stephanie goes, makes it to the hotel room, walks up to the 10th floor of the hotel, knocks on the door to her parents' hotel room, and inside, her father opens the door. She comes into the room, and as soon as the door was closed, he hit his daughter in the head with something very hard, and she went down just like her sister and her mother. He had also suffocated her to ensure that she had passed away. Back at the dorm room, Stephanie's friend started to get worried about Stephanie. She goes ahead and calls the hotel where Stephanie had told her that her parents were staying, and her father, Stephanie's father, had picked up the phone. Her roommate asks, is Stephanie going to come back? She kind of left her book open. I'm a little bit worried about her. And her father says, no, it's really late. It's midnight already. And she's just going to stay here and we'll make sure that she gets to school in the morning. So her friend didn't really think anything of it and hung up the phone and went on about her business. Sometime after he gets off the phone with her and the next day after their checkout time, William realized that he couldn't get out of this or he had to finish his plan in full. So the knife that he bought earlier that afternoon is what he used to kill himself in the bathroom of the hotel room. On Monday morning, Stephanie never made it to class and the Parente family never checked out of their hotel room. Housekeeping knocked on the door, and when no one answered, the housekeeper put the key in the door, stepped into the room, and immediately saw the girls laying in the bed, and then turned and saw Mr. Parente dead with blood everywhere in the bathroom. The housekeeper left the room immediately and called 911. When emergency personnel arrived, it was found that William had killed his whole family and then himself. The can of worms opened during the investigation, and it was found that William was being investigated by the FBI for the Ponzi scheme that he was involved in. The investigation was still ongoing after the death of William and his family. William didn't leave a note at the scene, so one can only assume that he committed this family annihilation due to his family troubles. William Parente, his stats were: he was 57, successful, wealthy. He murdered his family over money problems, committed suicide because of those problems, and premeditated the attack on his family by going to Baltimore unplanned, off schedule, just to get this done. I did try to look and see if anything else had come up about this investigation on William Parente, and nothing really came up other than just these basic facts. And given that they didn't have a note or anything to go off of, it was pretty clear that this was pretty much all I was going to find, and I went digging for a while. Just like the MO that I gave you earlier, William Parente and his family were church-going people. They were well known in the community. Everybody thought that they appeared to be successful and happy. There was no problems in their life whatsoever. And the more I go ahead and I, do this podcast and I research all of these things, I'm even paying more attention to like people that I work with and whatever. And I realize that everybody has issues. And even if they don't appear to have issues, that really doesn't mean anything. Everybody has a problem. Everybody has some kind of an issue. I mean, it may not be as deep as this, but I think we can all agree that everything isn't hunky-dory all the time. The next victims that I'm going to get into, I actually ran across because of this article. It's about Christopher Wood and his family in the Baltimore area, and these two family murders happened within a week of each other, which is pretty crazy that, the pressure would mount so deep. But just like the Parente family, the Wood family was also going through financial troubles as well. It's just really sad, all of these stories that I read, but without further ado, here is the second part of the series. On April 22nd, 2009, Francie's father was knocking on the door, wondering where his family was. He had not heard from them in a few days and was really worried about him. It wasn't normal for them not to call, to hang out, or just to kind of check in every day. Francie's father drives up to their house at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the house is eerily quiet. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, Francie's father drives up to a yellow home with a white porch in the front, covered with brown shutters on the corner of Washington Street, what seems to be a quiet neighborhood, with lots of neighbors around, and the house is eerily quiet, which is strange for a home that has 3 kids that live there. He had expected Christopher, Francie's husband, to be at work. He had just gotten a transfer from Jacksonville, Florida, with a railroad company called CSX. Francie should have been home because she didn't work, and the kids should have been running all over the house. Francie's father immediately had a bad feeling and knocked over and over again, each time with increasing anxiety that something was wrong. He did not relent, and finally he broke into his daughter's home. As he entered the home, it seemed to be unoccupied and so quiet you could hear a pin drop. He walked around the home and didn't find anyone on the first floor, so he slowly went upstairs. As he opened each door to the bedroom, he found a gruesome scene that no one should ever have to encounter. In one room was Fiona, his granddaughter, who was 2 years old, with 1 gunshot wound to the head. In the next room were his 2 grandsons laying in their bed, Gavin, 4, with 3 gunshot wounds, and Chandler, who's 5, with 2. As he made it into the master bedroom, he had seen his son-in-law on the floor. I can only imagine that his son-in-law was unrecognizable at best because he had shot himself with a shotgun. And on the bed lay his daughter, with 2 gunshot wounds in the head. His father raced out of the home confused and in grief that the only thing he knew to do was to call the police and pray. 20 minutes later, the police arrived at the gruesome scene and found things exactly as Mr. Bellotti had explained on the phone. The police investigation unraveled the effects of financial troubles and mental illness. Christopher Wood was married to Francie Bellotti Wood, and they had 3 children. In August of 2008, Christopher had relocated to Baltimore, Maryland from Jacksonville, Florida for a job transfer. His salary, $97,000, and for 2008, that was a pretty awesome salary. When they arrived, they had rented their home. Francie stayed at home with the kids, so while she was settling into life, she started tinkering around with the idea of looking for a job. In her free time, she would write a blog here and there to talk about her daily doings and her dreams. She also volunteered with the church and the community. She was very proud to be a mommy to her children, and she completely identified with the role of being a mother, but also wanted more for herself, so she was keeping her options open and looking around for a job. Chris had traveled often with his railroad job, so there were times when Francie was alone, but she had her family in the area, and that helped. Their church and local community would agree that they were a happy family that seemed to have it all together. Christopher also identified with being a family man and a father. The Wood family as a whole was a very family-oriented group overall. Francie's parents had lived in Baltimore for some time, and they had built a church in the area and were really happy to have their family back together. Christopher took the transfer to Baltimore because he and his family had a mountain of debt that he needed to pay. The housing market was terrible and only getting worse as time went on, and he found himself with $460,000 of debt. He had a house in Jacksonville that he owed over $200,000 for. He had also taken out 2 other mortgages out on that home in the amounts of $108,000 and $50,000. In addition to the financial stress he was under, he was also seeking treatment from a therapist for depression. There had, at times, been very dark times in Francie and Christopher's marriage, but his medications and therapy seemed to have been going well until they weren't. The housing market was crashing, and Chris couldn't keep up with the payments on his homes or the house that he was renting, so he had to foreclose on the house in Florida. To Chris, the stress increased the depression because even though it appeared that he was successful, the role of breadwinner had become his identity. He had to support his family, and he was failing. He started thinking only about himself and the problems that he was having without regard to his family because this was his problem to solve. Everything was slowly going down because of the economy, and he was truly feeling it. Can you see how this became a recipe for disaster? He was married with 3 kids to take care of. He couldn't pay for his home. The bank took it away. He was always leaving his family for travel with his new railroad job. So not only was money an issue, he didn't have his support system to help him. Christopher is already a depressed person and probably already in his head frequently about his finances and ruminating on how he was going to fix it with no way out. I'm not even sure if he had asked anybody for help, but considering what I've researched about this phenomenon, I'm pretty sure that he didn't. He couldn't stand it anymore and figured that the only way to end this misery and looking like a failure to his family was to take all their lives so they wouldn't have to suffer anymore. During the investigation, police found 5 suicide notes, 1 for each member of his family expressing his apology and sorrow, and 1 to the police explaining why he did it. In his letter to the police, he said that day-to-day life was weighing on him and his depression was getting worse with the increasing demands of work, money, and family. In the letter to his wife, he had said to her that the depression was weighing on him and that he knew that they shouldn't have gotten married because of his depression. So obviously, prior to all of this was already weighing on him, but he still continued with life, sought treatment, medication, and did everything that he could to get better. His toxicology report showed that he had 1 sleep medication, some aspirin, and 3 antidepressants in his system, which probably didn't help the fact either. Again, I'm not a psychologist, nor am I a pharmacist, but 3 antidepressants. I mean, it seems a little bit extra, but I mean, I don't know. It could be the case for other people, and if it is, then, I mean, that's just the way that it is. I mean, just for somebody that doesn't really know much, 3 antidepressants sounds like a lot, but they could be working on different neurons or neurotransmitters in the brain, and, you know, whatever you need. So at the end of the day, Christopher Wood's MO, taking everything into consideration, he was 35 years old. He did have a mental illness, which was depression. He committed suicide. He was the breadwinner of the family. He was also in financial crisis with $460,000 of debt. He was on the outside very successful, and even in his daily life he was successful. He had a family, he had a job, he made a lot of money, and granted that's not everything, but from the outside looking in, everybody thought that he was great, he was doing well financially, he had a great job that paid well. So all things considered, for us in society, he was a successful man that in our minds wouldn't or shouldn't have done something like this to his family. At the end of the day, it's really super sad, and I'll never really understand why people go ahead and take out their whole entire family, or why they would hurt their family, period, if, there's love. This isn't what love does. Love doesn't do this, and pain is what hurts people. It's not really love, and it's really sad that he had so much pain that he had to go and do this to himself and to his family, because a lot more people suffered than just them. And money is money. I mean, maybe he could have filed for bankruptcy or, something. But at the end of the day, too, who knows what would have fixed his mental illness, or if, this would have been the outcome anyway. Who knows? That's all I have for this week. Next week, I have a really crazy case for you guys. It took place in the 70s in Fayetteville, North Carolina, in Fort Bragg. It was an Army member, and it was a family annihilation. This one gets really deep, and it's not like the ones that I brought to you this week. So I'm going to try and bring you different ones so that we can go through and kind of study this phenomenon together and maybe come to a conclusion about all of it. All right, you guys have a great week. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to the show, and if you love the show, please leave a review on iTunes, and it would be even better if you shared it with your friends and got the word out. Until next time, bye.